All right, let's just dive right into it. Today, we're unpacking a really massive issue, the deeply entrenched systemic problems plaguing India's incredibly high-stakes medical entrance exams. We're going to take a structured look at the unprecedented 2026 crisis, trace the historical failures that led right up to it, look closely at the truly tragic human cost behind all those headlines, and then break down the severe new legal solutions being introduced to try and fix the whole shebang. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this explainer, we absolutely have to start with this staggering number: 2.27 million. That is the exact number of medical aspirants whose futures were just suddenly, jarringly put on hold when the 2026 NEET UG exam was abruptly canceled. I mean, imagine millions of students and years of grueling, nonstop preparation all coming to a screeching halt practically overnight. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with 1, the 2026 exam cancellation. Then 2, a decade of controversies. 3, the human cost. 4, the anti-cheating law. And finally, 5, fixing the system. Section 1, the 2026 exam cancellation. It's honestly mind-boggling how fast this all unraveled. The nationwide exam happened on May 3rd, 2026, right? But almost immediately, these reports of massive irregularities started surfacing. By May 12th, the National Testing Agency, the NTA, was forced to completely cancel the entire test for those 2.27 million students, handing the investigation straight over to the CBI. And then, just 3 days later, on May 15th, a retest was hastily scheduled for June 21st. The speed of this institutional collapse was just staggering. So, what exactly triggered this whole mess? Well, the core of the 2026 scandal was this thing called a guest paper. It was basically a leaked document spreading like wildfire across WhatsApp networks, mostly concentrated in these big coaching hubs in Rajasthan and Maharashtra. And the real shocker here? According to reports, this paper contained up to 120 questions that exactly matched the official chemistry and biology exams. No way, right? A whistleblower chemistry teacher in Sikar ended up alerting the authorities, which kicked off this massive CBI probe. The CBI actually ended up arresting professors in places like Pune who were literally running special classes just to dictate these exact leaked answers to their students. And man, the fallout from this was immense. The CBI uncovered a criminal network spread across multiple states. And get this, they even found evidence that the 2025 paper had been compromised by the exact same racket. Naturally, this sparked fierce, bipartisan criticism and triggered massive nationwide protests by students and their parents. Student groups were reporting intense anxiety and totally lost motivation. It got so bad that the union education minister had to step up, publicly admit to a breach in the command chain, and announce a planned permanent shift to a computer-based testing format starting in 2027. Section 2, a decade of controversies. Now, you might remember that just 2 years before this, in 2024, there was another high-profile paper leak. But back then, the Supreme Court ruled that while, over 150 students illegally benefited, it wasn't a wide enough systemic failure to justify a nationwide re-exam. Fast forward to 2026, and the leak was so undeniable, so incredibly wide-reaching, that a total collapse was just unavoidable. They had no choice but to force a complete nationwide cancellation. If you look back, this system has literally been walking a tightrope for years. I mean, going back to its tumultuous legal birth in 2013, NEET was initially quashed by the Supreme Court over state autonomy issues before finally being reinstated. Then, look at 2024. It was an absolute disaster of a year. You had 67 students getting mathematically impossible perfect scores because of a highly flawed grace marks formula. You had draconian security protocols where female candidates in Kerala were allegedly forced to remove innerwear just because the metal scanner hooks went off. And even the post-grad exams, the NEET PG, were postponed a mere 12 hours before they were supposed to start. The system has clearly been fragile for a really long time. Section 3, the human cost. We really need to pause here because this is the most heartbreaking part of the entire explainer, the actual human cost. Look at this quote from an anonymous 19-year-old student in the coaching hub of CODA. He says, "I only see it as 360 marks I must score. I haven't spoken to my friends back home in months. I lie and say teague talk even when I scored 120 out of 720. That just perfectly captures the severe isolation and the crushing weight of family expectations that define this intense pressure cooker environment. Over 200,000 students arrive in CODA annually, and they are often facing severe sleep deprivation and terrible homesickness. To put that pressure into perspective, just look at the math.
The competition is so fierce that only about 10%, literally 1 in 10 students, actually secures a coveted government MBBS seat. That leaves the vast majority, 90%, to deal with the devastating fear of failure and this awful feeling that they've somehow wasted their parents' money. When results fall short, the emotional impact can be fatal. And tragically, the media reported multiple student suicides directly following the 2026 exam paper leak and cancellation.
So, what's the actual takeaway for us here? It's that we have to start doing things differently. Change is absolutely possible through some highly practical steps. For students, this means actively building micro breaks into your day, tracking your energy levels, not just obsessing over test scores, and setting up a support buddy to check in with. And for parents, it's about fundamentally shifting the conversation away from how many marks did you get to simply asking, how are you feeling today? We really have to start treating mental health as a normal, totally necessary part of exam preparation.
Section 4. The Anti-Cheating Law.
Okay, zooming back out, how is the government actually trying to fix this legislatively? Well, they introduced the Public Examinations Prevention of Unfair Means Bill in 2024, because surprisingly, before this bill, there was actually no specific substantive law to deal with the entities compromising central government exams. So this legislation was drafted precisely to identify and legally deter the organized groups exploiting these vulnerabilities.
And they are not messing around with this one. The consequences are devastating, and they escalate significantly depending on who's involved. An individual caught using unfair means is looking at 3 to 5 years in prison and a fine up to 10 lakh rupees. But if it's an organized crime ring, like the ones operating the 2026 leak, that sentence jumps to 5 to 10 years, with a massive minimum fine of 1 crore rupees. Even the testing service providers can be fined 1 crore rupees and get barred from conducting exams for 4 whole years if they're found complicit.
And there's a crucial detail hidden in Chapter 3 of the bill. It designates these offenses as cognizable, non-bailable, and non-compoundable. What does that actually mean? It means the police can arrest you without a warrant, you cannot easily post bail, and the charges absolutely cannot be privately settled out of court. The system is essentially designed to show zero mercy to anyone exploiting the examination process for monetary gain.
Section 5. Fixing the System.
So how do all these pieces actually fit together for the future? Well, it really comes down to 4 major pillars. First, we're looking at ongoing Supreme Court monitoring to ensure the NTA actually implements committee recommendations. Second, a critical transition away from those vulnerable physical paper tests to fully centralized computer-based testing planned for 2027. Third, the strict, unyielding enforcement of that 2024 anti-cheating legislation we just talked about. But above all, and I can't stress this enough, it requires a profound cultural shift to restore dignity and mental well-being for the students who constantly bear the brunt of this entire system. Ultimately, when you take a step back and look at these massive systemic failures and the very real human tragedies behind them, we have to ask ourselves a pretty tough question. Are education systems preparing students for life or only for one exam? Because success is really only meaningful when a student is healthy enough to actually enjoy the journey. I'll leave you to think about that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.